takes an awful lot of practice. So he didn't know where the wee man had gone, but when he looked down on the floor, what did he see lying on the floor but the little silver dish? Well, he bent down and he picked it up and he had a look at it and he tried to remember then, what was it that the fairy had said? He said, dip the finger and not the thumb and hie away off to Scotland. And he touched his finger into the middle of the wee silver dish. Whoosh! Up the chimney he went, up that quick. He dropped the dish on the kitchen floor. He was squeezed out the top of the chimney, soot all over his face, all over his clothes, and up he kept going till he was looking down on the house, and it getting smaller and smaller below him going over the land. And he could see the cattle and the sheep all sleeping in the field because it was night time, and he was going over and over the land. Over the coastline, he could see lighthouses and the beams sweeping out to sea, and he was out over the ocean. And the next thing he saw, waves breaking at the bottom of cliffs. He was over land again, and he started to come down. He could see the lights of a big city in front of him, and he was coming down and down and down until he landed in the yard of some sort of warehouse in the city of Glasgow, and it after midnight. And he stood up and he looked around him. The place was locked tight for the night. There was no getting out until morning. And when he looked around him, he realised he had landed in the yard of a brewery. And all around him, in crates and boxes, there was beer. Bottles and bottles of beer. And sure, after flying over from Ireland, he was a wee bit thirsty. So he took out one of the bottles of beer, and young people might be wondering how would he open a bottle of beer, so he didn't have a bottle opener with him. But in those times the beers all had corks in the bottle, and everyone was smoking tobacco, so he had his tobacco penknife in his pocket and the wee blade for chopping up the tobacco, if anyone ever remembers them. So he was able to get the cork out of the bottle, no problem. And he had a wee drink. And sure, he said, you know, a bird never flew on one wing. And sure, here am I after flying from Ireland. So he had a second drink. And then I worked in Navan one time, and there was a neighbour man, a fella called Tom Regan, and Tom wore a Pioneer Pins badge. And that meant he had never drank in his life. I said, did you never ever touch it, Tom? And he said, no, he said, I never did. I said, why not? He says, well, when I was young, he says, an old man told me one time that the problem with drink was that one wasn't enough, and two was too much. He says, and three wasn't half enough. So I never touched the stuff at all. But for our friend in the brewery, Pat McKenna, he did two, and sure, he thought he'd chance a third. He had nothing else to do till morning. Well, three wasn't half enough. When the brewery was opened up in the morning, in came the workmen, and what did they find? Only this Irish man lying dead drunk, covered in ashes and soot, in the middle of the brewery. And they said, aha, we have him now. This is the boy that's been stealing our drink night after night, week in, week out. Because Pat didn't realise the fairy that he had seen was a cluracaun. If ever you're looking up your fairy lore, cluracaun is the fairy that will drink you out of house and home. And for anybody who has a house, even a modern day house, make sure your drinks cabinet is under lock and key, because you could have a cluracaun in the house, or you could have teenagers, but you want to make sure that it's under lock and key anyway. So the whole Pat up before the judge, and he was charged with breaking and entering and with theft and robbery. And the law was very harsh in those days. He was sentenced to death, but he was allowed one last wish. And the judge said, whatever it is, spit it out now, because it's your last chance. So Pat said, well, you know, he really loved his wife. He said he loved her so much that when he left home in Ireland, he never got the last chance to say goodbye and give her one final kiss. Could he write home to her and get her to come over so that he could give her a kiss? And the judge said, well, sure, no harm in that if you love her that much. It's the first time that request was ever made. So Pat wrote home to the wife. Now you'd be wondering, how come they didn't read his letter when he wrote home in Irish? And he wrote to his wife and he told her where he was, and he said to come over to him and to be sure that if she found a little silver dish lying beside the hearth from the morning he disappeared, to be sure to bring it with her. And that's exactly what happened. The day for the execution was set. The cart was rolled out. Pat was put in the back of it. The wee donkey was pulling it. He was tied with his hands behind him and soldiers all around it. And they wheeled the cart out through the city streets in Glasgow, down to the Haymarket, to the gallows, to hang him. And when he was in the cart in the Haymarket, it was the best attraction since Boyzone or whoever the latest band is now. The whole crowd was gathered in to see the hanging. And Pat was in the back of the cart, and the next thing the shout went up, "Make way for his wife, make way for his wife." And Pat's wife was ushered through the crowd, and she was allowed to stand up in the cart with him to give him his final kiss. He says to her, "Did you bring the wee silver dish?" She says, "I did indeed." He says, "Put it in my hand." And she did. And when she put it in his hand, what did he do? He twisted his finger, he said, "Dip the finger, and not the thumb, and hie away home to Ireland." And he dipped his finger into the middle of the dish, and whoosh, up into the air went Pat. And up into the air went his wife, and the cart, and the donkey, all the way back to Ireland, and landed safe and sound in Knockatalla. And if you want to know how true that story is, I can tell you for a certainty it's true, because Peter McKenna from Anaha saw the turf that Pat took home from the mountain in that donkey and cart. So we had a man trying to get into Emmyvale on his bicycle to get a drink. We've had a man flying over to Scotland to get a drink. So maybe what we'd look for is a drinking song. And as I say, Pat wrote home in Irish. I'm sure one of the best drinking songs in Irish is a song called Leanther Doing on Christy. Fill up the glass and it'll be full. Because whenever the crack's good, you never want to go home, you always want the glass to be full. And I've asked in advance a singer, Ali, who's with us here, if she'll give us Leanther Doing. So big round for Ali.
Okay, I didn't actually know I was singing this now. So I was asked about an hour before I came here. Okay.
You want to go to the microphone?
You want
Sorry?
You want to go to the microphone?
I don't really mind.
It's all yours. Do you want it?
Or bring the microphone down
Do
to
you
her?
want the microphone to you, or do you want to go up there?
I can sit here, I don't worry about
Yes.
it.
Sing out loud, we'll all hear.
Okay, no pressure. I work alley, I'm on shift for Sherry. Shift hope you're green, I got it. Her spree, her green, you teeny. There's sweet children, a scaffery, should friend her ardent ninny. A kicker in the struggies, the cogger needs a shitter. It's lintered in your grush, in the spear shell on. It's jagachi, alana liver, kalinina jilsha. Ranger in a briar, first walk through her greasy. Oh, the witches kill the witches, bam, the child, the shin far. They wish they got young knock, it's floater, word one tail shaw. It's lintered in a crushing, it's blue shell on. And the veil, pitchita, chalk to a leonina. I yell Gary, so brother rocks, so fat and lander, mina on. For your hair on scaffer, I grew ski, and a kin band. Cúiscín Spúishelan. Nervous me marv Jenny Maragina Biora. Oh, the gigas kill the giga glynna were Nori. Anshin Togina Killavegas Jenny Mamoru. Dispatch to Gila Biddle Jama Kirkbogus Maconer. This winter doing our Cruishin Spúishelan.
Good woman, Ali. Whenever we've been telling stories for a while, usually we'll jump in and out of the crowd for a tale. So don't be surprised if somebody's asked to tell something, or if anybody feels like telling anything, even better. Just let us know, and we'll get it out there. So we will. But just whenever Ali was singing and we're talking about drinking, and Emmy Vale had got a mention, it just put me in mind of a story. Usually they say one story borrows another. And there was a man living in Emmy Vale called John McMahon. Well, he didn't live in Emmy Vale, he lived out on the mountain, but he went into Emmy Vale to buy supplies for the farm. And this is back at the turn of the last century. Emmy Vale was a row of cottages, thatched cottages with half doors. And I mentioned there was a pub, the High House. It got the name the High House because, needless to say, it was 3 stories. It was higher than anything else in the village. But one of the sort of things that would be a bit scandalous to be doing that time would be drinking in the middle of the day, on a working day, in the middle of the week. It'd be shocking to be in there drinking. And in Emmy Vale at that time, in the main street, the cottages all had half doors, and the gossips in the street used to lie in the half door and gossip away with their neighbours about what was happening in the town. And then they'd go in and they'd do their housework and that. But John McMahon was in one day, he was getting supplies for the farm, and he went into the High House and he had a few drinks. And sure, those days when you come out and you were going to face the road again, you had to sort of tighten yourself up a bit. So he'd come out onto the street and he'd tighten himself up and he'd give a yoo-hoo! Just to get his spirits up, to get him right for the road. And immediately, all the half doors filled, and all the women out, look at your man there, in the middle of the day drinking. Shocking. Shocking altogether. And then John would have had to walk up this street under the gaze of all these women. It just would have been given out about him. So he had to figure out, how would you clear the street so you could walk up in peace and quiet? I don't know how you do it. But this is what John McMahon did. He stood back and he took a deep breath and he said, Emmy Vale, sweet Emmy Vale, without a church or steeple, but in every door there stands a whoer gazing at decent people. And all the women cleared it. So that was the way you get the way cleared if you want to get up through a village. I am going to ask a friend of mine just to give us a wee recitation, because like I said, there's all sorts of methods and means of transport, and we heard this recitation in the Tin Church the other week, and it's worth hearing it again. But Bridge, would you give us me all more?
I don't know what that has to do with transport.
Oh, it is. Oh, this is transport to the lands of romance, Bridge.
Oh, no, I didn't get much notice either, Alan. I'm sure you'll all hear me. I have a good loud voice, so. I heard, it's bilingual, by the way, and it's called Mihal Moore. I heard the story Oma Aha. If you haven't Gaelic, it doesn't matter. This rural Ireland tragic tale narrates a sad, seductive scale concerning lust without discretion, agus Beager, Ruddy Alafresh. Urawan for though in a little town called Carrow lived Buchal Mike named Mihal Moore, an only son of 34. When work was done at end of day, he'd settle down with a cup on tea and seldom felt the need to stroll or spend the evening time alone. His intellectual needs were drawn from books like Peg or the Cigar. Meanwhile, might be a bit left out here. Meanwhile, up in Ballarclea, a Colleen Jas had a bright idea. When Lehan the Sierra time came round, decided she would like to try arch beg coon like Carrow. No foreign food, not far to go, and there to meet the native clan agus Beacher, find herself a man. This Colleen Jas with eyes so blue was known in town as City Sue. The lusty Buckley came crawling, the all agreed she was gahall. She left her men in a state of shock. Oh, Mihal more be Coormock. The lights were on the parish hall for the local Faunuers ball. The Mihal on, the Susie on, dressed in most revealing gown. Our brave Cuchulainn of the West, his hurling medals across his chest, exclaimed when City Sue came in, and Mamma J. Well, Baker Shin. Come on, Francie, what's next?
Your recitation.
She left her men in the Golua on the floor they strut, cheek to cheek from head to foot. Sue whispered into Mihal's ear, Aishlum now, let's disappear. We'll use my place, the door's unlocked. You'll stay the night. It's Shomra Hop. Christ. Mihal's can was in the spin. Ní